Thank you very much for being here. I'm Franck Marchis. I'm a researcher at the SETI Institute at the Carl Sagan Center. To be more specific, I'm the moderator of this session, so you're not going to hear me at all. And it's good because I lost my voice yesterday. This session is about the complex relationship between artists and scientists. We can call that the love-hate relationship that we have sometimes. And how scientists and artists are trying to get it right, are trying to picture the cosmos the way we think scientists it should be. So I have four exceptional panelists with me. First, Mark Showalter, who is a researcher at the Carl Sagan Center at the SETI Institute, one of my neighbors. Mark is famous for studying rings and the wonder of rings of Saturn, using a Cassini spacecraft, essentially. He's also discovered the third moon of the Pluto-Charon system in 2009, I guess?
Fourth of Pluto.
Fourth? Okay, well, too many. They're going to find one every year now. Then we have Eric Hanson, who is a visual effect designer. Eric has worked on significant visual effect houses, specifically Sony Imageworks, DreamQuest Images, Walt Disney. He participated to the special effect for one of my favorite movies, The Fifth Element.
Oh, I knew it.
The bicentennial.
There's always somebody.
Yes, I'm French, so I have to like this one, right?
Yeah,
The Bicentennial Man, Castaway, and Hollow Man. Then we have Danielle Futzella. Welcome, Danielle. Danielle flew all the way from Netherlands to come here at the SETIcon. She's the owner of the ArtSource Graphic Design Studio in the Netherlands. She made all the illustration for the SETIcon that you can see. You can even buy posters and pictures from her. And then we have Lynette Cook, famous artist, space artist. She worked with most of us, in fact, at the SETI Institute. She painted the cosmos, planet, exoplanet as well. So the goal of this panel is basically to discuss the relationship between artists and scientists. And we're going to start with you, Mark, please.
Okay. Good to be here today. I am not an artist. I don't play one on TV. I sort of appreciate art, I think, but as many of us do, I'm sure. But I really was puzzled by the question we're trying to address here, getting it right, because in my vision, art doesn't have to be right. There is no particular right or wrong. Now, on the other hand, science does have a stake in this matter. And so at first I started to wonder, it was very recently that we all heard about the passing of Ray Bradbury. And I thought back to reading the Martian Chronicles as a kid, and it was all about humans coming to Mars for the first time, but it, among other things, talked about canals. So even in the days I was reading it back in high school, we kind of knew already that there really aren't canals on Mars. So you could argue to a point that Ray Bradbury got it completely wrong. And I think if you look at it that way, you're kind of missing the point, because it really doesn't matter if there are or not canals on Mars as far as Ray Bradbury is concerned. His book dealt with other themes about the human race and its relations to our environment, and it is a book that is very much a true book. It is simply set in a fantastical landscape, and whether it was an accurate or inaccurate fantastical landscape is kind of irrelevant. So starting from that point, I thought, well, okay, but it is possible to get it wrong, and that's kind of the motivation for my first slide here. I won't deny that it has a certain retro charm. I mean, I actually bought the comic book, which was from the mid-1950s, because it's such a compelling theme for somebody who spends his life studying the rings of Saturn. But I think it would be fair to say, in spite of the retro charm, that we probably couldn't bring off a story in this day and age in which the rings of Saturn, after killing that planet, come off and start attacking Earth. So charming as it might be, there is a way to get it wrong, and even an artist, I would say, probably shouldn't go in this direction. So why don't we go from there? Okay. Here is an example of a personal pet peeve. As I mentioned, I'm on the Cassini project, so I spend a lot of time thinking about Saturn, almost as if I were at Saturn. And sometimes you look at an image and you just say, they don't know what they're talking about. And this was a scene from the movie Star Trek. I suspect many of you are all familiar. I think the Romulans, if I recall correctly, were after the Starship Enterprise, and so they decided to hide in the atmosphere of Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, which has a thick atmosphere. And so then there was this dramatic shot of the Starship Enterprise finally emerging from Titan once it was safe to do so. And I turned to my husband when I saw this and I said, Titan's in the wrong place. Because anybody who knows anything at all about Saturn knows that the rings and all the satellites are in the same plane, and it doesn't ever look anything like this. Now, that doesn't mean it's not dramatic and beautiful, and I can sort of understand if I were a filmmaker and not particularly worried about, quote, getting it right, that this would be the view I would have chosen because it's got that dramatic image of the rings. But let me go on to the next slide and I'll show you what anybody who spends any time dealing with planetary systems knows, and that's that they're all in the same plane. So this is the reality of Saturn. Notice the lovely shadow of the rings being cast down onto the atmosphere of Saturn, Titan in the foreground, and the rings highly foreshortened behind it. That is the truth. I would also say that that's actually kind of beautiful. And so if the filmmakers decided they had to change reality to make it a little better, you know, okay, that was their choice. But at least for me, it totally pulled me out of the movie for that moment and said, something is terribly wrong here. And I've talked to others who felt similarly. But it's up to the filmmakers to do what they want, of course, and it certainly was dramatic. Okay, I'm going to switch to the other side of things and talk a little bit about the scientists. We scientists, we also have a kind of a story to tell, and sometimes we get that right, and sometimes we get that wrong as well. And I thought I would show you a picture of some point where I think the scientists got it wrong, and that is, well, it's a glorious mosaic that I put together, very crudely assembled 20 or so images from the Cassini mission showing this dramatic view looking down on the rings of Saturn. And I think we can't critique the content except for one little thing. And anybody want to suggest what it is? There's a hole in the middle. This particular image sequence was planned by the ring scientists, and so they did a very good job of mosaicing the rings, and they totally missed that picture in the middle. Now, you could probably fill it in with a little computer graphics or something. But the fact is that sometimes we scientists sort of lose the forest for the trees, and I think this might have been a place where a little bit of artist input into the Cassini imaging team would have gotten right something that I think could have been done a little better. Although the science from this image was quite extraordinary. Next one, if I'm trying to remember what it is. Okay, this is a glorious shot taken during a brief period in the Cassini mission a few years back when Cassini was passing through the shadow of Saturn. So the sun is on the other side of Saturn. That little dot at upper left is the planet Earth, seen across the solar system toward the center. That is one little pixel that is our entire planet. You can see dramatic rings around it and so on. This is an extraordinary shot, but this actually raises questions for me as well, which is that when we live in the world of digital perfection, what is the difference between this and something that anybody at Industrial Light and Magic, or I'm sure Eric could do, or any of our other panelists could do? Let me show you something else about this picture that I think the scientists lost an opportunity here, and that's the next frame. This is one of the images from the middle of that. That previous image was a mosaic made up of a dozen or so images. The actual reality is that several of these images have what's called lens flare. Anybody who does photography knows full well that when you point a camera at the sun, there's a lot of extra light, it's bouncing around inside your optics, and you get these artifacts. That is a flaw from the standpoint of Industrial Light and Magic, but it's also reality. Because one of the things this image says to me that that previous magnificent image does not is that this was a real camera. This had real optics. This acted just like my Nikon when I pointed too close to the sun. And I think the scientists should have not been afraid to say, hey, look, we had a camera out there, and it didn't capture perfection, but it did capture something extraordinary. And so there's a trade-off between what do you do to make the science accurate, and do we scientists really have to rival Industrial Light and Magic, or can we show them some of our flaws? So those are some questions I thought maybe we could bounce around at some point. Anyway, I'm done. I'll pass along to Eric.
Okay. So Eric, it's your turn.
Fantastic. Okay, that's fantastic, Mark. Is a way to get discussion going. What I'm going to do here is just show. Let's see. Hold on one moment. Just very quickly, my background is I'm actually not an exoplanet artist. I'll just say that right off the bat. But I do work a lot. I'm in this stratigraphy, if you will, between artists and scientists. And as a film artist, we work with the concepts of science a lot, especially because a lot of feature films that I've worked on are science-driven, they're science fiction. I also teach in the USC School of Cinematic Arts in the film school in the Division of Animation and Digital Arts. And even though, you know, many of our students, they have the choice of choosing their content, as I say, there's what I would call a lot of navel gazing that goes on. So they want to talk about their childhood, or they want to talk about, you know, some kind of personal issues. We also have students that are very motivated by science, and so we do offer that as direction for many students. So I've been, in a sense, the champion for that in our school, and I'm kind of in between the sciences at USC and the film school, and I'm kind of the conduit to help students have a relationship with research and try to tell their stories. So in other words, if they're not interested in, you know, examining their own life, they can go and actually tell the stories of science. And we have always, each semester, usually a few students that take this tact. Now that being said, within the realm of doing film work, you get kind of stretched between those two worlds too, because we deal with software that's very scientifically accurate. If you saw the other session we gave with Chris Ford, Chris talked about the ways that, you know, physical simulation now is all calculated. It used to be very faked in a sense. If you were to show a bouncing ball, you would actually keyframe what you think it would do. Today you wouldn't do that. You would let physical simulation do that for you. So, so then you can execute that work, but then of course it has to be seen and approved by others, namely the director. So the director may come in and say, you know, I know you eggheads think this is right, but it's actually nowhere close, make it do this. So this goes on all the time in film work, where we present scientific, you know, veracity, but it's not necessarily accepted, and we stretch it. So we have to have ways to be able to control accuracy for artistic purposes. And, you know, it's like it has to look right rather than be right. So that's one of the things that goes on frequently. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, these are just some of the films. And talking about, you know, Fifth Element, I would say there's no real basis of any scientific accuracy in this film, as you may know. That's probably the appeal of it. But there's certainly just a wild sense of fantasy and abandon that takes place in this film. That being said, you know, it is an enjoyable film, I think, with that in mind. But there, again, we never really thought about science very heavily in the creation of this film. These are some other scenes, flying taxi cabs and so forth. But other films, this is from, and actually I'm sorry I have this out of order, from Tom Hanks' Castaway. He was meant to be on the island of Fiji, but he's in fact just up the road on PCH from his home in the Palisades, and see, that's how you saw it in the film. So that's another absolute intentional inaccuracy, that actually that piece of rock is very Californian. It's in no way Fijian. But in any case, and this is kind of the common parcel of doing visual effects work, where we just fabricate out of thin air. And the other, and unfortunately I didn't bring a slide, but the other film I worked on, which had supposedly some scientific basis, is The Day After Tomorrow. I constructed the city set for that. And that, as I really looked into that, though, the science got more murky. I think it was based on a book. I'm going to forget who now, but in any case, it was not a heavy duty, but some of it was based, trying to be somewhat accurate on just wild conjecture. So anyway, these are the kind of things that we deal with in the work, and again, we get kind of stretched and pulled between the two worlds. The work that I do at USC with the film school is much more pure science, and what we're trying to do there is take the grants that the researchers have. There's always that 10% in there to communicate the communication of the work to peers or the public. And we try to take our skills as filmmakers, or develop those skills in our students, to be able to tell stories very faithfully. So we attach them with researchers. Sometimes they, you know, like we have the Wrigley Institute, which is out on Catalina Island, for marine biology, and a lot of times we'll have students that'll spend a year on the island, and then they'll come back with a finished film or short that embodies the nature of that work. So we've had some really great success stories with that. But in any case, so that's what I could offer to this discussion as we get going here is maybe, you know, where the line is drawn and, you know, when is it okay to extend truth and when is it designed to be realistic. So with that, maybe I'll pass that on.
Danielle? Danielle, your turn.
Am I? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. Well, I don't have slides, so for anyone who's seen my posters, they might want to close their eyes and think of my posters right now. So that might help. Well, I'm not so much a scientist, I'm only a designer. And I got in contact with SETI because I volunteered to help them. And Franck Marchis, he asked me to make an artist impression. This artist impression is of Minerva and his 2 moons. This is something that was under embargo, so I had to make this. And when I created this, it was like not visual. It was not a visual thing. It was only being measured by Franck. And then I had to draw this, and I gave it to him. And eventually it was publicized, and that's how we got into this together. Mm-hmm. And later oh, this is much more better. Later we got into SETIcon, and I created the posters for them. I am much more a fantasy person, so I make things with a lot of imagination. And with Franck I had to be sure that it was the real deal, that it was consistent to which he was explaining, that was measured and which was seen. So with that, I got sideways to what I was normally doing, creating imaginary things, and now I was doing something that had to be much more scientific. So there you got it, where artist and imagination has to meet, and also where we have to do it right. And well, I hope we did, because we cannot see it. It's just the best guess we have, and which was measured. But I think we got it quite right.
Yes, we did good.
And I think that's most of my story.
Okay, the first panelist, Lynette Cook, and I found your slide. Thank you very much.
We have images, yay! Okay.
So now I need to find how to put it on.
Danielle has just talked a little bit about the process of doing something for a press release, and this is an example of one of mine. This is Kepler 35, which was announced a few weeks ago, and it is really great fun working on something that is embargoed, that you know about, and a handful of scientists know about, and the rest of the world knows nothing. And you're sitting on this exciting information, it's all secretive, and you think, wow, I know this great stuff. And someday soon everybody else is going to know it too. But you have to keep it under wraps for a while. So when I'm contacted to do a piece, as I was in this case, I get to discuss with the astronomers, the discoverers, and often there is a press release, like a marketing public information person in the mix as well. And I like to do several roughs on the computer, and then I will post them on a hidden web page, and everybody gets to look at it and comment, and they say, I like this, I don't like that, I redo it. Finally, we get to a point that everyone converges, and then I do a final, which usually gets tweaked a few times as well. And when everybody's happy, then I get to deliver the final work, which is usually a TIFF file and sometimes JPEGs as well. And then there is the embargo date, and when that date and time comes, it goes out to the world and the media pick it up, and it's always fun because you don't know what's going to happen. It could be something that just hits it at the right time, nobody important who was the head of state somewhere died, and you know, the reporters are looking for news, and they decide, this is it, so it goes all over the world, and it's in the newspapers, and it's on the web, and it's in the books, and it's in the magazines, and that's really neat. And sometimes there's a lot going on in the news, and it just makes this little bitty blip, you know, that you barely see. So you never know, it's different every time, and that's fun. This is the kind of image that I tend to do most of the time now, and the idea is to make it look as though you were there in person. What would it be like? Okay, if I can have the next one, please. But we don't really know, of course, what is out there. And we know certain facts. We know, say, the type of the star, what the temperature, the color is going to be. We know the distance between the star and the planet, etc. So there is a lot we do know. But there is much we don't know. And this piece and what should be the next slide, if you can maybe, yeah, there we go. I'm actually showing two versions of what this planet system might be. This is one of Jeff Marcy's planets, and he and I discussed this at the time. And he said, well, how about two versions? One version showing what it might be like if this planet has a moon with liquid water, well, with water, just stick with water, and one without water, okay? And this has a very far distance between the star and planet, so it would be very cold out there where this moon and this planet are located. And this is, by the way, HD 168443 system, which is a multi-planet system. So in the first version, I did the no water scenario, okay? We have a moon that's very dry, we have dunes, etc., and that's really neat. In this version, no, it is not in the habitable zone, so it wouldn't normally have liquid water, but there's a pull, a tug gravitationally on the bodies, the moon, so there is tidal heating going on, and that is causing some of the ice to melt, okay? So that was really fun to be able to do two versions. And again, we don't know what's really happening, because right now our technology cannot detect the moons, okay? We look at our solar system, we realize most of our planets have moons, and we theorize, well, probably these do too. But that's something that we're going to know for sure down the road. Okay, next one, please. All right, this is my version of the pulsar planets, which were detected way before the planets around sun-like stars were found. And this is one version of what I think is a good science illustration, and the discoverer thinks works, but there are other professionals that can pick it apart. And I will not name names, but there is someone at a science magazine I worked with a few years ago that would not be happy with this. The reason is, this is a three-planet system. I am showing the pulsar in the distance, lower or the upper left-hand corner, and then I have the inner two planets very small there, again in that same corner. And the landscape at the bottom is the outer planet. Well, some professionals say, well, in reality, if you were there at the outer planet on that surface, you would not see spheres for the inner world. You would see little points of light because they are so distant they would not look like circles. And well, okay, that's true. But if you are someone who knows nothing about these planets and you are looking at the artwork, if you see little points of light for these two inner planets, what are you going to think? You're going to think, wow, that's part of the star field. I mean, duh, does that really describe the science? No, I don't think so. So this is a case where it can be a matter of opinion who is right as to what makes the best visual. And it comes down, for me, well, who's writing the check for me to do the art, okay? Am I doing it because I want to? Well, then I have to please myself and whomever I choose to consult with. If I'm doing it for someone else, a book publisher or a magazine, then I have to please them. So it's going to be the editor, the art director, the discoverer. If he maybe wrote the article, that's who I have to please. Okay, next one, please. This piece I did for the Gemini Observatory, and this was really kind of fun because I'm showing what happened in the past. They discovered some dust around a star and determined it was unlikely to have been left over from planet formation, and decided it had to have come from two rocky planets that crashed into each other and exploded, and all this great stuff went out and started circling around the star. Now, this one has graphics too, and I threw this in just to show that sometimes the realistic view isn't enough from a science perspective, that you need more information as well. And that's why these little graphics showing the system in comparison to ours, I think is very helpful. Okay, and last, this is a fun piece, and I don't get to do this kind of thing very often. I did this piece for Davis O'Bell's book, The Planets, and it tells a story. It shows the past, present, and future all in one. When she was a child, she made a little model of the solar system in a shoebox, and she asked me to recreate that for her. So I did that, and then in the wallpaper, I put all the moons of the solar system, which were not known at the time that she was a child. And through the window is an exoplanet system, something we hope to find, all right? And I put this in because at the bottom, you will notice the art paints, the brushes, and I think it's important in the context of this talk to discuss tools, because the tools an artist uses has to be appropriate to the use of the work that's created. And there are so many ways to be creative, so many ways to do things, be it a movie, an illustration for a press release, something more fine art oriented, but it has to be appropriate, whatever it is, whether it's computer, whether it's traditional media, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to have a discussion first between yourself to comment what you say to each other, or any? No.
I call just Lynette. I will defend you in the choice. Maybe we could go back to the previous, the one that had previous one to that, the one that had. If depending on where you are on this body and what kind of a camera you are using, you could be standing on a mountain far away, looking as we would at a telephoto image of the moon, our moon, where it looks very, very large. There's nothing wrong, as I can tell, with this image that it would not be a person standing on this body with the right camera could actually get that image.
Okay, okay, yeah. Thank you.
So
I
would stand up to you next time you have trouble with that editor.
I'll ask for assistance next time.
One thing I forgot to show. Can I get the VGA again? Right here. I forgot to show one of the more blatant. Well, two things. One, I think a good example of scientific accuracy that we're able to do on. I had the pleasure of working on Magnificent Desolation. I know some of you probably know that IMAX feature. Sorry. And this was working with Tom Hanks, who of course is very interested in realism. This is one shot that we were able to construct, and before I show this, just a small clip. This was taken by actual astronaut photography. As you may know, it recreated the Apollo 15 landing next to the Hadley Ryle. So the astronauts never entered the Ryle itself, which is a deep channel, a few thousand feet deep. But from photography that they took a lot of, actually they took panoramic photography long before it was kind of in vogue. They took overlapping Hasselblad images, and we were able to assemble those, stitch those together using new software, but then also reconstruct the terrain accurately. It's called Photogrammetry. It's a way to actually get 3D data out of 2D images. And then from that, we're able to actually take a camera down into the Ryle and fly it. So I'll show you that here. And it was largely, it's a highly accurate depiction of what it would be to actually travel down the Ryle. Down to the actual individual arrays of geology and rocks and debris. There's some latitude taken in that, but it was, the percentage and so forth was very accurately mapped. As the camera comes back here and ascends back up to the rim, this exactly matches a photograph taken. The one difference with this that, again, I'm not a planetary expert, but this was based a lot on the book Full Moon, Michael Light's Full Moon book you may have seen, which is a fine art book of NASA photography. But one thing that Light did as an artistic exercise is he diminished, normally we have what's called depth Q in our atmosphere where things get lighter toward the horizon. I think Lynette's work had shown a little bit of that. And that's one way to express depth. One thing I learned about working on this film is that everything is not the scale that you think when you remove that. So this peak off to the far right here is a 15,000-foot peak, and it looks like a small hill. But in any case, what Michael did, the author of this book, is he took basically painted the horizon down and darkened it artificially. So it's kind of the inverse of what you would think. And it created a beautiful aesthetic in the book, but Hanks wanted, this book drove the project, so we had to put that in our work, and it just never felt right. It was great for fine art photography, but it was really tough. We just wrestled with this on this project of how do you truly make it, this image doesn't actually convey a lot of it, but many of the shots, the other shots we worked on really show that off. So this was another case where, again, art was used as a mandate. There was a mandate of an artistic impression, but kind of coupled with trying to show a realistic sense. So again, another, kind of not tension, but just kind of challenge that we had within the project. But anyway, I just thought this was the nice thing about this shot is that it was a great way to really show, to synthetically take a viewer down into the Ryle. Now, the last thing I'll say about this, and this is a thing that really, no pun intended, riled me, I had to say it, is that when I went to see the film screened, they added a whooshing sound as the camera's going down. And I don't think that's what you would experience. So anyway, but that's a little story on that.
There's something I like to say about this. The thing with artists is that they mostly are very imaginative, and they have the tension, the idea to put more into it than they could know, because they are inspired, and they want to put some of themselves into the picture. Well, they shouldn't do that, of course, but that's the temptation I think every artist has. And I think with science, you shouldn't do that, because there's where you draw the line. This is not personal. This is something you do for science instead of for yourself or for an audience to please the eye. But that's the thing every artist wants to do. And I can see that with Lynette as well. You want to make something beautiful, but sometimes the reality isn't that beautiful at all. It's just the reality. And there's a big problem there with artists, and there's a big problem. There's where the discussion comes, or the fights maybe even. And I think that the first time Frank and I did this together, we got it right very quickly, and that is because he gave me this wonderful description, and it was very complete. It was even very, he had an image, but he also had a very big description, which was, I could get the feeling of what he wanted to show. So that was easy, but the next time we might go in each other's hairs.
That brings me to a question I wanted to ask to you, scientists, to artists, sorry. Have you ever given up on something you want to paint for a scientist or for a movie in your case? Because it's too complicated, or because the communication with the scientist was so difficult that it was impossible? Have you ever experienced something like this?
I have not, but some of my students, I think, have had moments dealing with that, probably more for personal style reasons, I think, than anything else. But again, one thing I've learned about scientists is they are a bit of a, I'll say a fiery lot in a sense. Well, fiery in the sense that, there's a I don't know how to say it, but basically there's a confidence about what they know, and so this has happened. I'm just with a researcher in mind in our school, but to me that's good, because art is collaboration, and you need to deal with others and deal with others' strong personalities, especially if you're going to work in feature film. It's nothing but that. So, but no, I think the aspect of tension, perhaps, if that's what we're talking about, is normally present in the work, whether it's film, and perhaps interactions with the sciences, but it doesn't have to be there. I mean, certainly, I think the main thing is that people, if you have to share a common agenda, and I think if the prize, the eye is on the prize, and the prize is understood, then I think it's fine. When people's personal agendas come into play, that's when there's problems.
Any of you want to add something about this question?
I'll just add, sort of from the kind of flip side, I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to have an image of some work I'd done with the planet Uranus appear on the cover of the journal Science. And I worked very, very hard taking my Hubble data and cleaning it up and making something that I thought was very illustrative of what we were seeing there, and sent it in, and they said, well, we're very interested in using your image on the cover, except your image has noise, and we don't put noise on the cover of Science magazine. So I had to basically scrap that, go into Adobe Illustrator, build a cartoon that was essentially containing the same information, and that's what eventually ran on the cover. And I still think a little bit of noise on the cover of Science magazine would have done no harm and maybe even showed people what science really looks like.
That's what I said. They wanted to make a beautiful image instead of wanting to show the real deal. Right. But that's the discussion you will have until the end of days.
Right.
If I can make just a couple quick comments. Two things spring to mind. One is I got my start in the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, and it was ingrained in me at the time that science illustration is art in the service of science. So as Danielle was saying, you can't just do what you want. I mean, we do have, I think, a need to make something beautiful, but it has to be scientifically accurate as well, or there's no purpose to it. And in regards to have I ever given up on anything, I did once. And I'm happy to say it was not with an astronomer. It was with a botanist. In my first few years of being a science illustrator, I did do some work on biology and botany textbooks. I was selected as an illustrator for a revision of a botany textbook, and it was a horrific experience that I asked to be let out of the contract, and that's the only time it ever happened.
Okay. Yeah, you go ahead.
Sorry to keep swapping here. One other thing that may be an example of another challenge, this was an opportunity that I had to work with National Geographic, which I was thrilled to do, and this was for a pull-out illustration for a, let's see, it was 2006, I think, the 100-year anniversary of the earthquake here in San Francisco. And in any case, it was a big scientific illustration about earthquakes. So this is what they sent me as a rough, and I thought, oh, this is just going to be fabulous, because I was so hungry to do something that really expressed science in the image. So this was then the modeling that I had done, kind of my rough taken from that, and we were kind of narrowing it in. And I kept kind of waiting to get deeper into the science. You know, I was busy building this city scene. This is the final image as it came out and was published. And it's an intricate image, but what ended up happening is if you look at this image, there's some education in here, but primarily the direction that I got from them at the end became almost comical, because the comments I got was rarely about the science. We didn't really emphasize the science, and this little inset here shows you the kind of things, these were the comments that they were giving me. And they said, we need more fire, we need more, you know, burning buildings, we need people fleeing, and we need, you know, like this, the horror of it all. And it had nothing to do with the science, and I was so frustrated. I was like, well, wait, but this is about, you know. So anyway, it just goes to show, you know, even National Geographic, you know, can be problematic with the work. But again, it was an enjoyable thing. But nonetheless, it's like you have to keep your eye on the prize of what I think you're trying to say.
I would just say that I don't think this is realistic because there is a taxi, and there is no taxi in San Francisco.
Good point. Well, we could have used you as a consultant.
The thing you can also say is that it just depends on who the person is that you're doing it for. Is it like the scientist himself you're making the drawing for then, or the art? Mm-hmm. Then he is going to agree with you that it has to be real science-based and not have all the explosions and stuff. But then you have also the salespeople, and they want to sell it. Yeah. And then you have a different discussion altogether, because there's a scientist who doesn't care because he is getting his money or his from somewhere else than from the people who buy the magazines or who watch the television. So they have different angles from where to go from. And I think that also determines if we have to be all arty-farty or if we have to be real science.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's time to open the floor for questions. Let me know. We have one microphone here, and I'm going to go downstairs, down to you. Go ahead, take the first question, please.
Yeah, in the picture of the pulsar planet, couple of things. That's a very high radiation environment, and I notice you have the rocks all different colors. Was there some basis, or did you just arbitrarily color them?
Well, it came about partly because of the program I used on the computer, and I really liked the look. But I did run it past the astronomer as well, and he and I talked about the aurora and the colors that might cast then on the terrain, and overall we were both pleased. So we did not go heavily into the geology and really how accurate that might have been, but it's kind of a, well, who knows question.
So I've done some work with robotics, where some of the stuff that I've made has somewhat influenced the science and the design. So a question that I'd like to ask you, the panelists, is has there been some sort of feedback process in where the art has actually influenced the science versus just being a representation of it?
I'm just going to interject very quickly that I'm good friends with the concept designer from Avatar, and actually he just did Prometheus as well. Basically, he's one of the top concept designers in Hollywood. And I know that at least on Avatar, you know, Jim Cameron was hugely driven by the science. It was science first, but yet the way that he explained it, it was a really great interplay of, you know, design maybe leading the science, but being informed by the science maybe initially. So I think I'm just going to say in concept design, you know, you probably could have design that may lead at times, but I don't think it would ever be divorced from the science personally.
Oh, I would like to add something to that. If you look at, for example, Star Trek, they would design Star Trek very futuristic. And what you see is that what we think is futuristic is what they made then, and it became our future. It became, so you can say the designers then made the science, made the future, because what they had then, the beam me up Scotty thingies, are now our cell phones, or the chairs that were all very futuristic are now almost old-fashioned. So I think design absolutely makes a future, and for that makes a science.
Yeah. I work a bit with the Hubble telescope, and the 95% level, all of my images are taken through a very, very broad band filter. So there's no color information at all. It's just not what I'm interested in when I use Hubble. But I learned very early on that if you want to make a pretty picture out of that image ever, then you need a little bit of color. So I actually, in one proposal I wrote, I actually said, and we will actually include 3 images for red, green, and blue, something like that. And the review panel just tore us apart for that one sentence, because they said, how could you be using Hubble resources just to do a pretty picture? So the next time around, I wrote that we would be using red, green, and blue for calibration and geometric validation of our images. And no one's ever complained about it since.
I have a sort of retro question. I suspect that all of the images we've seen on the screen, with the possible exception of the comics that Mark showed at the beginning, were all computer generated. No? Okay, then good. Then maybe you're answering my question. I'm kind of wanting to know, are computers a good thing or a bad thing? Particularly for the artists, do you feel that the computer has helped you, or has it constrained you by forcing you to become hyper-realistic in a way that's non-artistic?
Well, my computer is my aorta. If I didn't have it, I'd be dead. And I design almost everything on my Mac, and I have this tablet, this Wacom tablet, and it's like I have an extra arm, and I couldn't do without it. So if that's answered it.
Yep. Go ahead.
Well, let's see. I think I have an extra arm, but I have maybe one less leg. I have a love-hate relationship with the computer. I really do. I am able to do some things today so much more easily and effortlessly. There are other things I cannot do that I love that are now gone essentially forever unless I do it some other way, say not in science illustration. I started as a traditional artist. I have now retired my airbrush, and all of my science illustration is now done digitally. If I spend too much time on the computer, I get neck pain and I get headaches, and I just cannot do this 8 or 10 hours a day, day after day after day. I just cannot. And I miss being able to push paint around with a brush and seeing a white piece of paper magically transform into something totally different. But today, my clients expect things to be done quickly, and they need to be able to be changed and tweaked and adjusted quickly in time for press releases that sometimes are less than a week away. And you cannot really do that with traditional media and make the changes in the time frame necessary. And I also feel that once upon a time when everybody did things traditionally, I could pick up a magazine, Astronomy or Sky and Tell, flip the pages, and every piece of art I saw, I knew which artist did it. There was something distinctive about that style. I'd say, oh, that's an Adolf Schaller. Oh, that's a William Hartman. Michael Carroll. I mean, I can go down the list. I knew who they all were without reading the caption and the credit. Today, I can say that about only a handful of artists who have somehow managed to use the tablet and the tools, the same software everyone is using now today, and make something original. Most of it all looks the same, and I think we have lost something. And when you look at fine art and you look at what goes in the galleries, say go to downtown San Francisco to Sutter Street or Geary and go in the galleries, and you see the brush strokes and the paint, and you see what people are responding to emotionally, I think there's a little bit that's been lost now, okay? The path of science illustration has really diverged a great deal in, say, the last decade.
Okay. I would like to disagree with that. The thing is that it's partially true because you see a lot of artists using those big brushes and then it all looks like it's airbrushed. It all looks so smooth and so, but you can choose. You can choose also to use another sort of canvas, also digital, but it is quite real. And you could use smaller brushes with also, which would look like a crayon. So you can have different materials to work on. So there is a different, but that might not work for the exoplanets, but it works for art. You can make art in a computer. And if you have a certain style, you can also do that in a computer. You don't need the original canvas, the paint. But some artists just like to smell paint. That's the thing. And I just don't. So that's the difference, I think.
Okay, well, I'd like to comment upon that and say that I agree that art can be created many, many ways. And to go back to my previous comment about the tools being appropriate, my work tends to be done for the press releases, the textbooks, the science magazines, and the colleagues that I interact with through the International Association of Astronomical Artists, who are some of the, you know, they've been around for a few decades. And we have seen the shift. More and more of our clients require computer generated and require higher and higher end 3D software. And there are some people that really take to that. You know, they love it. They love the digital environment. But I do see a trend away from something that's a little more fine art. So my response is, yes, there's room for the more fine art approach, but it's not in that end use. It is somewhere else.
It's a new way.
Yeah, you have to express that in some other way or some other form.
Let me get a word in. What I would say is that the issue, and this is a very old issue with me. I've dealt with this issue now for 2 decades, and everywhere I go, this follows me, right? So, but yeah, I can't seem to shake it because I'm always in environments that, like in the case of film, there used to be traditional methods of models and matte paintings, you know, and this is kind of what I do, but I do it digitally. And then in the case of education, you know, in my animation program, we have a lot of, you know, traditional, you know, animators and stop motion and so forth. So anyway, long story short is computers, we both start with blank screens. You know, the computer doesn't do the art. It assists you in many ways. But, and the amount of effort is probably relatively equal. In some ways, one may outdistance the other, but in general, it's just a lot of effort. But the thing is, in computers, it's just difficult. It's not pure art. I mean, it will be in the end, but the process becomes so technical that the problem is there's a lot of people that don't do it well. So and it kind of mars things. And a good example of this is in feature film. There's currently a backlash now against digital effects. You hear like, oh, I'm tired of these digital effects. I don't want to see it. It's just like this barrage. Well, part of that is, what the film is. I mean, you don't go to Transformers expecting a fine art film. I mean, you're going to be barraged. And but the thing about digital effects, at least in film now, is that we're used to, like Castaway, it's a great example. That's a huge effects film. Nobody thought of it ever as an effects film, which I loved working on that for that reason. It's called invisible effects. And that's because I think the team did a pretty good job overall. But the problem is because of all the pressures in Hollywood on these films, things are done, either they're difficult, the team may not be skilled, it may be done overseas with, unskilled labor, etc. And the work gets out and they kind of like, oh, well, that's terrible, that's digital. Well, no, it's just artists that were not at the top of their game. So that's the problem with it, is that it's a complex world, a complex tool to create art with. And I got to tell you, I mean, Lynette's work, it feels so romantic to me. Well, of course, now I understand you're working with a computer, but just to work in pastel or gouache or whatnot, I mean, it's a great, romanticism of doing art. For film, unfortunately, we can't do that anymore. The matte painting artists did that for years, and again, I teach that in my classes, and it's just such a great, I love looking at matte paintings and miniatures. And I experienced a little bit of that when I started, like on Fifth Element was a great hybrid of both. It was just a golden time of effects. And today, as somebody, and I used to tour my students through effects houses, and we'd show them all the miniatures. It's like, oh, here it was from True Lies or Titanic or whatever, and it's just great. Today, like somebody said, touring an effects house is about as interesting as touring a cheese factory. I mean, it's really just heads in front of monitors. There's nothing to show. All the work is in there. But in any case, it's just it's an issue that there's no easy answer for it other than I can just say it's hard working with computers. And unfortunately, they get a bad rap. Like Danielle was saying, you can choose to do manually driven work. And the thing I'll close on is in our program, the real opportunity, or I think the really powerful work right now, at least in animation, independent animation, is a fusion. So it's where you would take manual methods, but you would interact with digital techniques, or you treat it, or you inform it, and it's just a wonderful hybrid. So that's, I don't know if you keep up with short animation work. There's a website called motionographer.com, which is a big site for beautiful work, and that's kind of where it's at right now. So, but anyway, computers are hard. That's all I can say.
You've sort of covered my original question towards Lynette, traditional tools versus computerized, and so I'll just ask, what year was it that you hung up your airbrush?
Oh, it was about 5 years ago, something like that. When I did my book, Infinite Worlds, I was in the transition. So I have several pieces in there, if you saw it over in the auction area, that many were traditional, and then some had some traditional and digital elements, and then a handful were digitally done. But yeah, so I was a holdout for a long time, but now it's all computer.
So hard science and hard sci-fi. There was one book I read, it was about Saturn, and the astronauts landed on this large creature that was floating around Saturn, So science fiction seems to, use real science that we know and make these fantasy things. It seems like each one of you could address that for me. Because they don't seem to have a problem. Is it because it's just one person creating their world, and the issue is that you guys have to work with a lot of people? Or is there a hard science problem when it translates to art?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think if somebody were making a movie about a creature, as you said, orbiting Saturn, I would have no problem with that. That sounds cool. It's only when they get to the point where they're trying to pretend that it's real and it's not. And so my quirk, my annoyance, I guess, with the makers of the movie Star Trek, which I won't go beyond that. It didn't break the movie for me. It just took me out of the moment. was they wanted to make it real, and they were talking about it as if they were making it real, and they were very explicitly made a decision at the last moment not to make it real because it didn't look cool enough for them. And to my mind, I think that was an aesthetic mistake as well as just being a little bit dishonest. But if you want to have bizarre creatures that are in orbit around planets, and oh, go for it. I'd love to see that movie.
Okay, I would like to say something. I thought it was Einstein who said that science could never do it without imagination. And I think that is the truth, because we don't know so much which could be out there. And I think there are no creatures orbiting any planet. But there could be things we cannot see or we don't know about. And maybe things we could imagine. So just let it flow out, and you never know, you never know. So why not? But don't say it's science. Say it's science fiction, and it may become science.
I have a question, a final question for the artist here. There is more and more artists in residence in scientific institutions, at CERN, at JPL, at SETI Institute. Will you be interested to be an artist in residence? And if yes, in what kind of institution you will be an artist in residence?
With you, of course.
That was not planned.
I would love that. In fact, once upon a time, I had a dream of many scientific organizations, those that look for exoplanets, to team up and collectively have an artist in residence so that I could work with all of them. And I thought that would be fantastic. I'm still waiting for that.
Let me just say, if any art institutes out there are looking for a scientist in residence, please let me know.
Yeah, good. Well, I mean, my work is very commercial driven, but I think, you know, I could see doing a residency with maybe a national park as an artist in residence, it's something like that. I do a lot of natural history work, so that would sound appealing to me. Not that SETI would not, but Charles Lindsay, who's a good friend, is doing a wonderful job of that right now, so we'll, you know, but I think it requires a certain type of artist that can really be progressive and really show, you know, have a richer imagination. So you really need someone that's going to have original vision. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So this is the end of our session. Let's thank once again our fantastic panelists. And they will be around today, so you can still talk to them.
Thanks. Oh, good job.
Yes, thank you.
That was nice.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. You did very well.